In 1992, the Smithsonian Institution was sued. A researcher had spent 4 years requesting access to physical specimens the institution had received in the late 1800s, giant human skeletal remains, documented in newspaper records, shipped with paperwork, received and logged. The Smithsonian's response was consistent across every request. No such specimens exist in our collections. 4 years. The same answer every time. The lawsuit went nowhere. The specimens were never produced. And the story you are about to hear, which involves thousands of photographs, hundreds of newspaper reports, buildings on 6 continents, and a civilization that appeared on every major atlas for over a century before being erased from every map simultaneously, has been waiting in archives, storage rooms, and estate collections ever since. I am going to show it to you now. The first thing you need to understand is that the photographs are not rare. That is the detail that changes everything. If there were one photograph, one image of an impossibly large human being standing next to people of normal height, you could explain it as a trick of perspective, a manipulated print, a staged curiosity from an era that loved its spectacles. One photograph can be dismissed. What exists is not one photograph. Cartes de visite from the 1860s, cabinet cards from the 1870s, tint-type images from the 1880s, spread across the archives of the British Museum, the private collections of French historical societies, the cataloging records of the Smithsonian, the imperial archives of Russia, a persistent, consistent, multi-decade photographic record of human beings of extraordinary scale, captured in formal settings, wearing ordinary clothes, surrounded by people of completely ordinary height who are showing absolutely no sign of surprise. That last detail is the one I keep returning to. The people standing next to these individuals are not staring. They are not pointing. They are not performing the body language of people who are in the presence of something they have never seen before. They are standing the way people stand next to someone they see regularly. Someone who, in whatever context this photograph was taken, is simply a person. The context matters. These are not circus photographs. The traveling performers of the 1800s were documented obsessively. Their names were on posters, their roots were in newspapers, their managers kept financial records that still exist. The individuals in these photographs have none of that documentation. They appear in private settings, in formal offices, in outdoor spaces adjacent to administrative buildings, in group portraits with colleagues. They appear as if they belong there. Between 1850 and 1900, this photographic record builds steadily across British archives, French collections, Russian imperial records, language consistent across multiple countries that had no coordinated reason to describe the same thing in the same terms. Then, around 1900, the photographs stop. Not gradually, abruptly, as if someone looked at the accumulating record and determined that it pointed toward questions that were not acceptable to answer. What are those questions? Start with the most obvious one. If these individuals existed in sufficient numbers to be regularly photographed across multiple countries over 50 years, where are the buildings they worked in? I want you to think about a doorway. Not the grand entrance of a cathedral, not the theatrical gateway of a palace designed to overwhelm visiting dignitaries. A working doorway, in a back corridor of a government building, in an administrative passage that no visitor was ever meant to see, in a functional space where the only purpose of the door is to let the people who work there move through it. Now tell me why that doorway needs to be 12 feet high. Government buildings constructed in the 1700s and 1800s, across Europe, across Russia, across South America, across colonial Asia, contain interior working corridors with doorways between 12 and 15 feet tall. The staircases have risers so high that a person of normal height must consciously extend their stride to climb them. The desks in the administrative offices, the chairs in the courthouse waiting rooms, the furniture recovered from estate sales connected to these properties, all of it scaled to a proportion that makes a 6-foot person feel like a child sitting at an adult's table. This is not one building, not one architect with unusual preferences. This is a pattern repeating across thousands of structures on multiple continents, all built in roughly the same period, all featuring the same oversized working proportions in spaces where grandeur serves absolutely no purpose. Government buildings in St. Petersburg have 12-foot interior doors in back hallways, where no visitor would ever be taken to be impressed. Municipal structures in Buenos Aires have staircases requiring enormous strides. Colonial-era administrative buildings in Delhi contain furniture that would have dwarfed their supposed British occupants. These were offices, registries, courts, built to function, not to intimidate. built to function for someone. Now place one of the individuals from the photographs in front of one of these doorways. The door fits perfectly. That is the moment when the architecture and the photographs stop being separate anomalies and become a single coherent picture. And that picture leads directly to the one place that every academic institution, when it encounters it at all, immediately stops looking. Pull out an atlas from the 1700s, a real one, not a modern reproduction. On that map, printed with the same cartographic confidence as France, as Spain, as the Ottoman Empire, you will find a territory labeled Tartaria. It is enormous. It covers a vast portion of northern Asia. It appears not just on maps but in encyclopedias, in diplomatic correspondence, in trade records, in the published accounts of explorers and government officials across multiple European nations. For more than a century, Tartaria was treated by the educated Western world as an unremarkable geographic reality, the kind of place that appears on maps because it exists. Then, in the mid-1800s, it disappears, not because it was conquered. Conquered territories leave paper trails, peace treaties, transfer records, the administrative paperwork of one power absorbing another. Tartaria leaves none of that. It is not absorbed. It is not renamed. It simply stops appearing on maps. The encyclopedias are revised. The atlases are redrawn. Within a single generation, the educated Western world proceeds as if Tartaria had never been there at all, but the buildings remain. Across the territory that Tartaria occupied on those vanished maps, across Central Asia, Russia, and Mongolia, there are stone structures of extraordinary scale and precision, halls vast enough to dwarf modern convention centers, doorways sized for occupants that no official history acknowledges ever existed, engineering executed with a quality that the civilizations we credit with these structures demonstrably did not possess the technology to achieve. No construction records, no architectural documentation, no explanation for how these structures were built to these specifications, unless the builders were the individuals in the photographs. Think about what that single assumption explains. It explains why the photographs show these individuals in contexts of authority and oversight, never as merchants, never as common laborers, always as administrators and overseers. It explains why the architecture of governance is scaled to their proportions, while residential neighborhoods remain human-sized. It explains why the photographic record and the final references to Tartaria disappear from the historical record in the same decade, the 1890s, as if whatever system had been operating simply ended, and the evidence was quietly and systematically gathered up. And it explains why the newspapers were full of bones. For the entire second half of the 1800s, mainstream American newspapers reported the discovery of giant human remains with the tone of routine news. The New York Times, 1885, a skeleton of extraordinary dimensions unearthed from a burial mound in Michigan. The San Diego Union, 1895, bones of unusual scale recovered during railroad excavation in California. The Middletown Signal, 1899, human remains far beyond normal size found during construction in Ohio. These were not fringe publications. These were the papers of record for their cities, and what they reported were not isolated anomalies, scattered individuals buried alone in the wilderness. What they reported were organized burial sites, systematic burial practices indicating community, culture, and continuity, remains accompanied by artifacts suggesting metallurgical and architectural knowledge, inconsistent with what official history assigns to the people supposedly occupying those regions. Many of these skeletons were shipped to the Smithsonian Institution for further study. The Smithsonian now states that no such skeletons exist in their collections. Hundreds of specimens, documented in newspapers, shipped with paperwork, received by a government institution, gone. After 1920, the reports stop. Not gradually, abruptly. The photographs had already stopped. Now the bones stopped too. The maps had been redrawn. The encyclopedias revised. Everything pointing in the same direction stopped pointing at the same time. The objects did not get the memo. They are still turning up in estate auctions, in museum storage rooms, in barn cleanouts and demolition sites across Europe and North America. Ordinary chairs with seat heights of 30 to 36 inches, nearly double the standard human measurement. Backrests rising 7 and 8 feet. Armrests positioned where a normal person's arms would hang uselessly. Not thrones, not ceremonial pieces. Dining chairs, office chairs. The furniture of daily working life, scaled for someone who is not us. Wrenches recovered from demolition sites. 4 feet long, 5 feet, 6 feet. The wear patterns are real. The grip erosion is real. These tools were used by hands much larger than ours, operating mechanisms requiring strength far beyond what a normal person can generate. Museums label them industrial equipment without explaining what industry required a 200-pound wrench. Auction houses sell the chairs as oversized Victorian design without asking why anyone would commission furniture they could not sit in. The silence around all of this is the most striking feature of the entire record. Not aggressive suppression, something quieter, a collective agreement, never formally made, that certain questions lead somewhere the institutions of knowledge are not prepared to go. Academic institutions do not debate the skeletons. They do not examine the photographs. They do not measure the doorways. They simply proceed as if the questions do not exist. In that silence, the objects wait. I keep returning to the faces, not the scale, the faces. The ordinary, unremarkable expressions of people standing next to individuals who, by every measurement available to us, should have been the most astonishing thing they had ever seen. The complete absence of wonder. The posture of people standing next to someone familiar. These were not monsters, not myths, not the product of embellishment. They were people, individuals with faces, with clothing, with the particular stillness of someone who has been asked to hold still for a photograph. People whose existence was so unremarkable to the world around them that no one thought to explain it. We made them remarkable by erasing them. The doorways are still there. The staircases are still there. The buildings that make no functional sense for human-scaled occupants are still standing, their original logic buried under centuries of institutional silence. The photographs preserve what the encyclopedias removed. The architecture remembers what the maps forgot. The tools, the furniture, the organized burial sites, 50 years of newspaper reports, all of it points toward human beings whose existence has been reclassified as speculation by the same institutions that once carefully documented them as fact. The giants in the photographs were real. The buildings were built for them, and the most important question is not who they were, it is who decided we should forget, and what else was erased in the same moment they were.